Hi, everyone. We have folks trickling in, so we're going to wait a couple of minutes. Just a reminder, we are recording the webinar, but nothing that you say or contribute in the chat will be recorded. We'll also share a link to the full benchmarking report in the chat that we're going to be discussing today. It contains the comprehensive data that we'll reference, and I believe you'll also receive it in a follow-up email with some of the highlights from the webinar as well. Going to give it 1 or 2 more minutes. Still see a bunch of people joining. I feel like we should have elevator hold music or something to entertain folks for the next 60 seconds. Not doing a good job. Peter, maybe you want to do
it's Courtney's screen because I looked at the stock market.
I was just going to say that. I was like, this is just enough time for me to look at how much money I'm losing.
All right. Seems like we have a quorum, so we're going to get started. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on GenAI and legal, new data on what actually works. My name is David Mainiero, and I'm the VP of AI Enablement and Legal Transformation here at Factor. Very happy to be joining you today, and thank you so much to our panelists, who I will introduce in a few moments. Before we dive in, some quick housekeeping. We're going to share a link to the full benchmarking report in the chat. It contains comprehensive data that we'll reference today on some of the slides, and I believe you'll receive it as well in a follow-up email, as well as some of the highlights from the webinar discussion today, which we hope will be a fulsome discussion. Today's session explores a critical question that a lot of legal leaders are asking, which are, we've heard a lot about AI, we've seen the hype, but what are other departments actually doing with AI? What's working in practice? What are people trying? What's failed? And our recent benchmarking study surveyed over 120 in-house legal leaders and included dozens of in-depth conversations to answer precisely that. So you can review those findings in depth in the benchmarking report, but to highlight a few of those, the findings really reveal what I think is a fundamental disconnect in legal AI adoption, which is very different from where we were about a year and a half ago, where a lot of people were in a position of, we don't have enterprise LLM access, we haven't built an internal platform, or we don't have ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini or whatever it might be. So this fundamental disconnect that I see now is that there's pretty widespread access and a sense of urgency to do something, but also fairly limited impact. And I think that is not super surprising, but let me share some numbers to paint this picture. So of our respondents, 61% of legal teams now provide broad AI access to most or all team members. And And when I say broad AI access, we mean something like a Copilot, a ChatGPT, your own in-house enterprise LLM platform, or LLM selector or model selector. And then nearly half of respondents, 43%, have reported upgrading existing legal tech licenses to include premium GenAI features. This is something we have seen and will continue to see with most SaaS platforms, is that they're going to have a higher tier of AI offering that you're able to subscribe for. So maybe this is your CLM, maybe this is an e-discovery tool, maybe an e-billing tool, whatever it might be. I'm sure you're using a variety of pieces of legal technology, and you're seeing these features come into production. The final part is that a quarter, so 25.3%, have invested between $100,000 and $500,000 on an annualized basis in specialized legal AI tools. So these are new AI-focused point solutions, or something like a Harvey or Co-Counsel. And where those have been the investments, I think they're far in excess of those dollar amounts. So that's kind of the broad picture. But despite these significant investments, only about 19% of folks feel very confident using these tools. Almost half, 48% roughly, can report they can just about get by with the current AI tools that they have access to. And about a third are trapped in what we call pilot purgatory. This term, pilot purgatory, sparked an interesting discussion when I posted about it on LinkedIn. Some commenters pointed out, like, hey, what do you mean? Piloting is really important for responsible experimentation and making sure this all works. And they're absolutely right, when pilots do have a purpose. So what we're referring to here is that what distinguishes pilot purgatory isn't careful experimentation. It's initiatives that begin with vague mandates from the C-suite, from the board, to do something with AI. We've heard that legal is a great area for AI adoption and innovation. So what are you doing? And there's this immense pressure to show some results from that. But a lot of this pressure early on from early adopters resulted in these kind of pilot purgatory situations where they lack clear hypotheses or success criteria or any path to scale. It's just, not to pick on any brand names, but it's like, we bought access to this legal AI platform or that. We have 500 people that have access to the pilot. And now 6 months, a year later, at the end of that pilot period, they aren't much further along in making a decision of whether that platform is a solution for them, or whether they should invest further or continue to implement that. There are some benefits to that of, giving people access to AI, certainly. But that's what we refer to in terms of pilot purgatory. And we find that these projects or pilots can consume a lot of resources and create the illusion of progress while delivering little of tangible value. More concerning, I think, is that we found the disconnect between investment and understanding. So about a fifth of respondents weren't even sure if their existing tech stack had been upgraded to include AI features, which suggests a significant gap between the spend and the awareness of that. And based on our research and work with legal departments globally, we've identified at Factor 2 critical pillars that must work in tandem with each other for successful AI adoption. On the left, first is training and upskilling, the journey of capability building. This takes time, this takes patience. The ROI isn't always immediately visible, but if you squint, you'll see it. But it's fundamentally necessary and ultimately transforms how teams will do the work. So it's about both technical understanding, but also strategic vision for how AI will reshape legal service delivery. On the right side is this pressure that I referenced earlier for practical, immediate results. So concrete applications in high stakes business context that really demonstrate value. That, for instance, we're spending $500,000 doing something this way. Can we do it for 100 with AI? legal departments need these types of tangible wins and measurable impact to build momentum, to gain credibility, and to secure continued investment. And this is where use case selection and the implementation approach becomes critical. So what's fascinating from what I've seen is how many view these as competing priorities when they should be complementary parts of an integrated strategy. And I think that's a function of budgets. Like, there are scarce resources devoted to this type of transformation, and people have to make tough choices. But the most successful departments that we studied create these virtuous cycles of early wins, building confidence for deeper learning, and enabling more ambitious applications over time. We've also seen in our data that co-learning communities like the Sense Collective, which, shameless plug for Factor with the Sense Collective here, but I think the data really bears this out, that we're seeing a significant kind of leadership advantage, and which jives with our hypothesis that AI adoption is really a human leadership challenge. And I think these advantages are striking, from the Sense Collective respondents versus the broader market. We saw 40% more likely to build internal AI tools, 54% more likely to provide broad AI access, 23% more likely to report strong IT collaboration. And I think the most telling is the bottom left, which is 0% reporting being stuck in an I really need help zone. So there is some baseline competency or that epiphany to be able to create that virtuous cycle that I referenced. So these teams, certainly there's probably a little bit of selection bias in these statistics, I acknowledge, but I think what's key is that these teams aren't simply checking boxes on AI access. They've really created structures to learn collaboratively, to iterate responsibly, and to scale successfully. And that bridges the gap between access and impact. And I want to emphasize something important here, whether it's through the Sense Collective or other initiatives that you might have going. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are ways to harness the collective wisdom of working with your peers. The challenges you might be facing may feel unique, but they're shared across the industry in most cases. And what matters most is taking that first step. Just don't do nothing. And if you invite AI into almost everything you do for a few days, I promise you will start to find your way. And if you have questions as you experiment on personal projects, we're always happy to be a resource, as I'm personally fascinated to see how people are thinking through this journey. I have realized that I did not introduce our panelists. And so as we move into the panel discussion, I want to introduce the two exceptional panelists who are joining me today to bring complementary perspectives to this conversation. So Kelly is an assistant general counsel at GSK and an engaged member of the Sense Collective. Kelly's at the forefront and has been at the forefront of technology and innovation in legal, and an active participant and leader of many different legal communities. We've asked her today to share some insights from her experience in behind closed doors discussions within the Sense Collective, of course, without betraying member confidences, along with some of her own frontline experience in building GenAI capabilities in a sophisticated legal environment. We also have Peter Duffy joining us. Peter's a respected voice in the legal AI market who works with law departments and providers across the ecosystem. He has some really great perspective on upskilling and training and has built programs to devise that, including as part of the Sense Collective and our SenseMaker Academy. So I think he brings an invaluable perspective on market trends and adoption patterns and really where teams get stuck. So I think we're going to kick off our discussion with some live polling throughout the session. As a reminder, these are anonymous responses. We're not tracking them in any way, so we hope you'll engage. And so if we could start with the first question set to set a baseline, I'm curious for the folks here, which of these options best describes the current state of GenAI adoption in your legal department? So are we still exploring, no tools in use, limited to a small pilot group, broad access but limited usage, actively scaling across workflows, fully integrated into daily work, or not sure. Okay, seems like we have some results streaming in here. Okay, so it seems like a lot of folks actively scaling adoption across workflows, a lot of broad access and limited usage, probably the two biggest categories. I'm very happy to see the actively scaling adoption across workflows. Still exploring no tools in use is still a decent segment here, combined with this kind of limited to a small pilot group. And so it's interesting to see this spread. I think this is a good foundation for discussion. Peter, I want to start with your reaction, looking at these poll results and broader patterns in our report. How are teams successfully moving beyond early experimentation into meaningful adoption? So to get into that, 34% category that we're seeing here, and what distinguishes those making progress from those stuck in pilots?
Sure, yeah, good question. And for this, I kind of pointed three different things in particular I see people doing well to drive adoption and move beyond experimentation. And the first thing is having clearly defined specific use cases that people are experimenting with, not just general broad strokes exploration, but having really targeted pain points and an awareness of what are the problems that you're looking to solve with the introduction of any technology. So that involves clearly defining why are you introducing this technology? What are you hoping to get out of it? And having really clear metrics around that as well. So you can actually assess how that progress is going, along with really deeply understanding why you are attempting to solve specific problems, what you are looking to solve, is having really close support network for those who are getting hands-on with the technology and really tight feedback loops. So you can really have regular conversations with users. And this isn't just surveys, this is really speaking with people to see what are the challenges that they face, what are their sticking points, and supporting them as they face those sticking points. So knowing that they have that support on hand and sharing those learnings across the group of users, which ties in nicely to the third point, which is really sharing the success stories where you do identify them, where you have champion users within your adoption group, really understanding how are they using the technology, what is the impact for them, and sharing those success stories with others who are also participating so that people can see that this technology can help people like them in situations like them. And it really starts to bring it to life and move beyond just general exploration into something a lot more tangible where people can start to see the benefits in their day-to-day.
Thanks. That's really helpful, Peter. And to add to that, Kelly, from your experience in a legal department that I know is navigating this journey quite effectively, and from your experience of speaking to others in similar positions from the communities that you're involved in, what are the key inflection points that you see in helping teams move past these, not just the early experimental stages, but also, like, I've seen a lot of folks, and particularly in highly regulated industries, start with an AI committee that then becomes a bottleneck for all approvals of all AI usage. And I've seen some people navigate that a little bit more quickly, a little bit more successfully. I'm curious what your perspective is on specific approaches that have accelerated progress.
Sure. And I just want to say hi to everyone. I see some of the names out here that I don't know. I was kind of wishing a little bit that I had a tool that could pop you into something so I'd know who have context of who's joining as an attendee. So, I think it's really important to understand the organization you're in and making sure that the leadership has brought the energy to this new horizon we're on. And I don't think AI committees necessarily have to be blockers. They're a good part of the process. What really is instrumental is that the organization has been in a state of preparedness for change for a while. They've been focusing on continuous improvement. They actually understand their needs when they're looking at AI. And I think, as Peter mentioned, understanding the use cases that could have a big impact with the low cost, and how to focus on those first, and really bringing in those impacted by those use cases to be part of that, to see how they can get something from it, can do more, can strategize more, what it is in it for them, right? To take the time to say, here's a use case, let me get involved in this. I think we're ready. Let's move forward. And then being able to say to these committees, here's a use case, the risk is not high, this is what we've done, and we're really excited about it. And that will help you move forward. I think as the more we've talked about in the collective about some of this, it's the mindsets and how far an organization might already be around understanding their workflows, their information, and how to improve, or where the biggest benefit will be.
Thanks, Kelly. That's really helpful. And a follow-up question for either of you. We talk about how kind of executive sponsorship and this being a human leadership challenge. There are certainly folks, as the people actually doing a lot of the work on the ground, that their knowledge, their kind of institutional memory, and sometimes tribal knowledge that's not documented is really important to be able to get this into micro use cases, or use cases that maybe help across a group of 5 or 10 people. But I'm sure everyone here has experienced, even personally and certainly on their teams, some reticence from folks of like maybe not wanting to step on the gas of adoption because they're worried about their jobs. And it's certainly the reality in this cost environment of there will be people using generative AI to cut costs, or at least aiming to. And so what's the importance of messaging to your teams about how this change will happen, and understanding what it means for them? How important have you seen that be, and just anecdotally in some of these discussions with folks?
And maybe I'll start with that, because I think, especially when it first came out and the push and the initiative to drive it, everyone was a little bit overwhelmed, because there have been automations and there's been different types of AI along the way, which many people are used to, right? But this was new, and it was almost overwhelming. And so people thought the worst, right? And then the messaging outside of corporations was quite large, and there's always cost reductions that people are, hearing about. But if you try to break it down and really show them, this is, here's a small use case, and give them examples, or have them collaborate with another group where it's a very small thing that made a huge impact in their day-to-day, that gave them more time, right? It's like bringing it to life for them, instead of making it this big balloon that's out there that they don't know how to pierce, right? So it's just little baby steps, and the thought process can go a long way in the messaging.
Totally agree on this one. I just to add to that as well, that I think the messaging is critical for the introduction of AI. As you say, there is a lot of hype out there, and people can interpret this as potential job replacement. But the reality is that really a job is a collection of tasks, and AI is not in a position where it can deliver every single task that people do. So when it's broken down into, look, this can do specific tasks that you can do, like in the past, or like we currently use, grammar checking tools when we want to check our spelling, or we use other tools when we do calculations with numbers. We just now have another tool that is capable at some of the specific tasks that we do in our day-to-day. And that really helps to put people at ease when they're like, oh, yes, I use spell checking. And oh, yes, of course, I use calculator for when I do number calculations. So it really kind of brings it down to to the level to understand that this is not replacing jobs, it's task replacement. And then that really helpfully positions it from an expectation management point of view, that AI is wonderful and amazing at many different things, but it has limitations. And by very clearly, explicitly calling out those limitations, again, puts people at ease that they're not being replaced in their jobs. And also it helps with adoption, because when they start to use AI and they see that, yes, it is good for some stuff, but not for other things, they're not surprised. And it's not a case that they've been promised something that will do everything. The limitations have clearly been outlined. So that messaging and framing is really critical. Firstly, to put people at ease that their jobs will not be replaced. And secondly, to actually help with the adoption of the tool, that they don't get disappointed or frustrated when it doesn't live up to expectations.
I agree with that. I just wanted to add one thing, David, sorry, is that, I think being in legal or a legal and compliance organization, we're also focused on risk. So people, instead of like accepting how it can help, might just start throwing risks out there. But if you try and personalize it for them, like this AI tool could be like a trainee or an intern, and you're going to have to put extra effort in. You're going to have to oversee them, but they can really pay off as you go forward, and making it real for them in that way. Yes, there are risks, but this is how you can mitigate it. Yes, it's a different way of working, but how can it help you? And with a little bit of effort, how much can you get out of it? And that brings it to life for them.
Yeah, definitely considering risk and reward on balance, and also comparing to the status quo of like how much of an increase in risk is like there's risk endemic to everything. What are we actually measurably increasing in risk here? What's the reward? I do hear a lot of that. They are valid concerns, but I do hear a lot of it as the way I interpret it is sometimes an excuse for progress. So I totally agree with that. Let's move to the second poll, which is how is your legal team currently building GenAI skills and confidence? And very curious to see how specific some of that is to legal work here. I find that context is critical, and domain expertise is critical, and we'll talk about that. But without previewing too much, let's take a look at the poll. So the options are internal AI training, maybe legal-led or ops-led, a formal vendor being brought in, or a tech provider to provide training, partnering with IT on joint training, relying on self-guided learning, no training in place yet. And for this, I'm not talking about like if you just rolled out a new CLM and you're getting training on their new document review feature or something that has AI integrated into it. I'm thinking more of like broad-based enterprise LLMs or ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, whatever it might be that is your kind of broadest form of access to AI capabilities. This could include something like a Harvey as well. Okay, let's take a look. A lot of internal AI training, legal-led or ops-led, a lot of relying on self-guided learning. Curious whether a lot of that entails like self-paced learning resources that are being made available, or kind of like safe playground environments. Some partnering with IT, very few relying on kind of external training partners or vendors. And a good portion with no training in place yet. Peter, I know you're very close to this work, diving into the skills questions. Do you think, beyond the results of this poll, are legal departments underestimating how much upskilling or training or maybe reskilling, depending on what your perspective is here? I know, Kelly, you have some perspective. Are they underestimating how much is needed here? Like, is general prompt training or learning how to use Gemini or ChatGPT? I know those, Google and OpenAI and Microsoft Copilot, they all have a lot of self-paced resources available that are really good. Is this enough, like prompt training in enterprise LLMs, or does successful adoption require more domain-specific approaches?
Yeah, so on this, I definitely think people underestimate what is involved in getting people ready, and not just to have a sense of what the technology can do, but for true adoption. And because fundamentally, GenAI is a different technology to what we've had before. It's bad at what computers are typically good at, which is having predictable output, which is, it can't retrieve data consistently every time like a database or search. This is different, but it's also good at what computers are traditionally bad at, in that it can understand natural language, it's creative, it can draft content. So it's really a totally different mindset of how people interact with technology. And typical training is not really suitable for how people will get that type of knowledge. It's very easy to underestimate as well that the hesitation that people will have. So as Kelly made reference to, people have these like sense of, this is AI, what is going to happen with our data? What are the risks here? Hesitation around hallucinations and job replacement. So there is a huge default kind of hesitation that people will have that you need to overcome. And for true adoption as well, it's really critical that any training and upskilling is tied to people's day to day. That if they have more general training about the technology, and it's not, they don't see how it relates to them in their contracts role or their compliance role or their disputes or any other area, then it just feels abstract. And unless it's really kind of tailored to the day-to-day of what they do, to the problems that they face, people don't really digest it. And it's something that there's actually quite some risks around it too if people don't fully understand and appreciate how to use the technology, as we've seen in recent months where we have people, submitting cases to the court of hallucinated case law, that if people are using technology and don't understand the limitations, it's really risky, because people can be just asking general questions of this technology, and what they receive back can be plausible sounding answers, but being wrong. And the risk of not having proper customized, tailored, upskilling for people for legal specific use cases is, firstly, people will not adopt. And secondly, if they do adopt, they may not know the limitations and the risks that they're inherently introducing by inappropriate use of the tools.
Yeah, I want to, not to digress too much, but I wanted to pick up on something you said in the beginning, which is this kind of automation bias idea that we expect a computer gives us kind of perfect automated results, where with GenAI, that paradigm is shifted and it's more generative in that you're able to kind of not only create new information or synthesize information in new ways, but you're also doing fundamentally what the work of lawyers do is. Like if you think back to law school, even the case method itself is built upon analogical reasoning. It is applying case law, new sets of facts to existing case law. And if you use one of these newer reasoning models, being able to, even go in there and give it a simple legal analogy and let it think for a minute, I think you will see some pretty incredible results. So whereas previous automation and computer kind of software waves have not been able to deliver, I think there's really interesting promise here, and people need to understand that paradigm shift and actually feel it in practice. Kelly, I know that your team has participated in, the Sense Collective's co-learning environment. We'll be embarking on some of the Legal AI Skills Lab training soon. But speaking broadly from your experience with this, what kind of learning approaches and structures have you found most effective in building genuine confidence, especially for teams who are not traditionally that technology literate or tech forward? I know you have some views on the term training versus upskilling here as well, and I'd love for you to share some of that.
Sure, thank you. I think just one thought came to me when Peter and you were just speaking is that I don't know, I can't ask the participants this, but I would bet that most people in legal have been to more sessions and CLEs on the risks of AI rather than how to create a AI use case or how to use AI or how it can help them, right? So that's just the mindset that's out there. And, when I was talking to you earlier, like, I don't really think training is, we need a new term, right? It's almost like Jedi mindset awareness or engagement and excitement about how we can do things and envision working in a different way. And, I just, probably people can't comment, but I would bet more people have been to risk CLEs rather than use CLEs on AI. So, what works well is, I think, really getting people engaged and actually listening to them and trying to understand what their awareness is of AI and maybe even what a use case is. I mean, that's a term that just got thrown out there. And a lot of people, that's an intimidating term for them. What do you mean use case? You mean I have to like turn my whole litigation over to something? Or, what is a use case? And having sessions where you can be in labs and feel what AI is, going to promptathons and thinking with groups on how to create prompts that could create, be mini project managers for your workflow to give you more time. Really collaborating with each other, I think, is my theme here, and using something like the Sense Collective where you have different mindsets coming in. And one thing I've really done, and maybe I've gotten off track a little bit here, but it's people that aren't working with me necessarily, but I know their business units, I know kind of what they're doing. I've sent them to some promptathons or some sessions with the collective where they're doing labs where they can see that it's not overwhelming and it's not this huge thing, that they can start with just a small task and create a use case out of that and have some ROI on it for them personally. That was a lot, sorry, but the Jedi mindset is key.
Definitely. We need people to be able to move X-wings with their mind. That is a very helpful. If they could do that with generative AI, that would be fantastic. But that's really helpful, Kelly. I want to continue on that thread of use cases that you mentioned. Like, that is an odd term. It's like, this reminds me of a dinner I was at where my mom said the word flavor profile, and one of my friends said, "Hey, what's the difference between a flavor and a flavor profile?" And I just sat there. I was like, that's a very interesting question. And it's like use cases. It is what kind of altitude you're looking at it, right? There are micro use cases. It's like, I invite AI to the table for almost everything I do within reason. And I find out what my own personal micro use cases are, what's maybe not going to save me time, but it'll certainly save me some mental stress and mental load. And you find out your use cases. But I think when we talk about use cases, and certainly in this next poll that we're about to pop up, use cases people think of in like broad categories like contract review, litigation, clause extraction, workflow automation, research. Those are pretty broad. So there are varying degrees of altitude, I think. For the purposes of the poll here, we've kept it quite broad. But I do want people to realize what Kelly's saying is really important. It's like what looks like a broad use case, like you want to build things that have broad applicability across practice areas and functions, but the niche expertise and how that work is done on a day-to-day basis will create a lot of divergence in how these are implemented, what systems they work with. So always think at different levels of altitude for these use cases. But let's take a look at the poll options here of what you are actively pursuing or planning to pursue. And this is I think a multi-select. So we have contract drafting and review, internal knowledge search, or chatbots. And for chatbots, we don't just mean like a ChatGPT or broad chatbot. We mean something that is allowing you to query an existing knowledge base, like, ask what your insider trading policy is and ask questions of a guidance. Legal research and summaries, regulatory compliance, other litigation or discovery, document classification and workflow routing, or none. I'm glad to see a lot of different ones. Contracting is a big one, which makes sense to me. I expected this internal knowledge search to be quite popular. I'm a little surprised that legal summaries is, I did expect legal. We've kind of blended these together. Legal research. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what people are doing there. Document classification and workflow routing, certainly. So really interesting mix of priorities here. Peter, looking at these results and what you see across the market, I know you've done deep dives and demos with hundreds of tools. What are legal teams finding the clearest ROI on right now? And are there particular use cases that are delivering outsized value? Conversely, are there some getting maybe more attention than they deserve?
Yeah, so on this, first on the results, I'm not surprised to see contract drafting and review at the top. So we're seeing a load of attention, both the number of vendors in the market who have solutions for this, but also where people are buying and when they're starting to see value, we're seeing really dramatic impact here. And for this, to kind of break it into two categories, there's the pre-execution document review. So this is like running playbooks against third-party vendor contracts to spot risks, apply redlining and comments, and do summaries of your contracts. And for those type of use cases, it can be absolutely remarkable. Really, the time savings there are phenomenal. I've seen this firsthand. I use these tools on a daily basis. It is a really compelling use case, is for the review of third-party contracts. Also, within this contracting space, which is outlined here as review, I'd break it out as post-execution document review. So this is where you have a large volume of contracts and you want to run analysis across them. And whereas in the past, we had our traditional machine learning where you would just be purely extracting specific information. But now with generative AI, it's not just extraction. You can go multiple layers deeper in doing analysis and answering questions. So interpreting the specific information. And the time savings there are remarkable. People can literally do stuff that would have taken weeks in days or hours. So that's really where we're seeing massive benefits tangibly. And this is not hypothetical. This is happening right now for those who are getting hands-on and adopting it. On the results here, just to say the legal research and summaries, I suspect that the part of the reason this is so high is the summaries piece. So if we were to break that out as pure legal research, like using case law, that's one where I think potentially some of the hype exceeds what is capable, and that's a really hard thing to do with the verification of the different case law. But on the summary side of thing, again, amazing. People have so much time savings, both from summarization of things like contracts or new regulations coming through or any type of information. This is one of the compelling use cases that people are getting huge value from, and it kind of ties into the broad third category that I'd outline here for use cases, which is kind of like ad hoc legal productivity. And so this is things like drafting or summarizing information, quickly digesting documents, and effectively rephrasing content. So those three things in summary of pre-execution document review, post-execution bulk analysis, and third, the ad hoc legal productivity, there is huge ROI for people who tackle it intelligently. They can really see a lot of benefits.
Thanks, Peter. That's really helpful, and I agree with all of that almost exactly. Kelly, I know that I'm curious about your team or the approaches you've seen in terms of use case selection. I know you've had some exposure to how different folks are doing this in addition to your own experience. Was there a structured process for, I think identifying these types of categories of use cases is not too difficult, but I'm curious about like a structured process for identifying and prioritizing opportunities. Is there like a GenAI transformation business case or ROI template you have to fill out? Is there competition for internal development resources on that or spend? Or does it emerge more organically where you figure out an opportunity, it'll save some time or enhance productivity, and you just kind of go point resources at that? Like generally that kind of structure, or what you're seeing, how companies are doing this, and also like how you balance quick wins versus more transformative but complex applications.
Okay, there's a lot in there, so I'm hoping I can try and get all of it. But I think it's a combination. You need an organized way of just getting people to think about use cases and then kind of ranking those in various different ways, right? First of all, like how hard is it to get there? What kind of funding is needed? in the effort, right? The internal effort as well as the money that's put forward. And then you can rank it based on that. But then you also have to look at, what is the strategy of your company? Our company is to help as many people in the world as possible, right? And AI is a gateway there. And as our part of legal, what is good in AI now that can help us do our jobs better so we can deliver faster in a safe, compliant way to help get medicines to our people, right? So you've got the very structured thought process, a gateway to get money and funding and resources. And you've got this knowledge that you need to impart on everyone to encourage them to understand AI and what Gen AI is good at now, right? What can you do with Gen AI that you may not need a lot of money or effort to do? What are your quick wins? How can you use it to make your day better in a compliant, secure way? And you bring those two together and you start to flesh out really what are the use cases that we want to spend money on? What are the use cases that we really don't need to invest extra time or money in, but maybe can give more around the Jedi mindset to enable people to use what's already out there? And what has been really proven, of course, there's hallucinations. You have to know what your input and output is and be on top of it. But what can they use now to help their day and their work and their job move faster, and they can function in a more strategic way? There's a lot of operational stuff out there that can be taken away or made easier by some of these Gen AI tools as we prepare for the next level of what's coming, or the investment in the resources of the new tools that are going to be answering the contracting pieces and all of it. So, I think my point is that you have to have both. You have to have growth for organic development, and you have to have a very disciplined way of, when you have to invest, what are the use cases that are worth investing in, and what are they going to bring, and how are you going to measure those ROIs?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And one point you made that I wanted to follow up on is that, and you didn't exactly say this, so I'm a little bit
You're reading my mind? The Jedi mind?
So
Yeah.
more than it reminded me of a point I wanted to make, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there are also things that generative AI is like, using a nuclear weapon to kill an ant or something for it. It's like, I saw a use case the other day that someone was like, hey, did you see this new open source model has this specific OCR model? And it's like, well, great, but like machine learning can do that. And we can just get things through Adobe and every existing software we've had for 10 years to do that. So maybe there are use cases where that's helpful, that where my lack of, advanced technical understanding I'm missing, but that's not a use case that someone needs to go ahead and solve, OCR or something. If there are existing ways that work well, you don't need to kind of revolutionize it with generative AI just for the sake of doing so. So that should help in kind of use case and spend prioritization as well.
I think that's a great point. And it's also part of being organizationally prepared, right? What is this something that AI is best suited for, or is this something you can do without AI? And you already have those tools. And if neither of those apply, what in your organization do you have to get ready for them to fall into the other two categories? And I think the more an organization was prepared from an information perspective, especially a legal department, if they had already been transforming, they're going to be more on the cutting edge of using what is available and moving faster.
Yeah, and just to bring that to life on one of Peter's points about this automation bias idea, like I see this in contract drafting, which is a broad term, but I mean like literal generation of a contract for a particular scenario from a template where you're kind of form filling or field filling. You don't need generative AI for that. Generative AI may be layered onto that so that you could just, message a bot or email in natural language to say, here's what I want, here's the counterparty, and it'll help you fill out that form. but you don't want a large language model getting creative with what language goes into your template. So that's an area where the traditional automation might actually be better, and really breaking down, a broad term like contract drafting or negotiation or draft generation or form generation, understanding what goes into each one of those things and where generative AI excels, where existing technology may excel. I think that that's very important. But I want to move to the next poll in the interest of time. So I'm curious from the audience, what kind of support would most accelerate your GenAI adoption from your or your organization's perspective? I think the options we have here are training, IT alignment, so working with your own internal development resources for developing specific use cases or building out integrations. Leadership buy-in, maybe you don't feel like you have the requisite sponsorship or attention or budget associated with this. Tool selection support, is it that you're having trouble acting like a venture capitalist and picking winners among hundreds of different technology options that are emerging? What exactly is it that you think would be the biggest lever for you at this moment in time? Data readiness is one of these kind of playbooks, templates, prompts. Some people doing this as shared prompt libraries, some building out playbooks and templates so that they are more ready for the moment where generative AI is going to step in and do some of this more agentically. Interesting. A lot of emphasis on understanding what others are actually doing, not just talking about, which is, so we have a good topic for the webinar today, it seems. Playbooks and templates, that kind of data readiness piece, help prioritizing use cases and defining ROI, I would sort of lump in with that first bucket. And if you combine those, that's over half the respondents here. Training and onboarding content, better integration with IT is fairly low priority, which I'm a little surprised by. But I think these responses highlight how multifaceted a successful adoption really is. So, Kelly, as someone who's participated in the Sense Collective, how have you seen some of these elements interact with each other and act as accelerants? And what do you think is most important to kind of getting your feet under you in terms of accelerating your Gen AI adoption journey?
So, I mean, just quickly, I think my overall theme would be the cross-functional collaboration. I think I mentioned listening and awareness, kind of getting a pulse on what your legal organization is aware of, and then matching them up in different ways with other groups or other BUs who are also going through this process, or business units, sorry for the acronym, and really, and not focus so much on, do I have AI skills? Do I know how AI works necessarily? Or can I run an AI program or build one myself? But really working in groups as they go through this process. I mean, I think talking collaboratively with either within the legal industry, or outside of it within your own organization about how the tool can help, working on a use case together, a very small one, and then bringing it to life is something that's going to accelerate and be meaningful to the people in your department. So then you can move forward with the adoption. The other thing I would just say is that convincing people to use it in their own personal lives is a great way. I give them ideas about how I use cloud, but and then showing them what it can do if you change the prompt and things like that. That gets them excited about what they can do at work. So I'll end on that.
I totally agree. My wife has put our dogs on the moon, various different settings outside of the context of the typical pictures in our house that we take. So I totally agree with making it personal. It helps people connect and have those epiphanies. If we could go to the next slide, I want to show some of the benchmarking results and comment on those as well. I think something important that we found is these interconnected factors of knowledge, skills, and collaboration. And these obviously interact and reinforce with each other in practice. Peter, from your market perspective, of the factors that we just reviewed, what do you see legal teams struggling with the most? Are they sufficiently prioritizing collaboration? Like, legal's often not in the position of being kind of a product manager and directing IT into how they want to build a specific use case. So they're often passive recipients of what is being developed for broader use. I'm curious what your perspective is on that collaboration, if that's an underdeveloped dimension, and what kind of recommendations you'd have there.
Yeah, sure. On the collaboration piece, and this ties in really closely with what Kelly was saying as well, that on this, it is new for people. People need to wrap their head around it. They need to understand, how they can best use it. And that ties in with the poll results too, where we had the top thing that people wanted was, an awareness of what other use cases people have. And the main point here is that collaboration, it is critical to for people's journey to actually succeed. That ultimately, if people are working in isolation, they're learning all the lessons for themselves, and it's a very inefficient way to go through this journey to face all those challenges and solve them all yourself. Whereas by collaborating with other departments like IT, who will have seen the kind of GenAI usage across the department, will have additional data points about what's working well, what's not working well. It just really kind of accelerates that journey because you're not learning all those lessons firsthand in a painful way, but you can actually prevent them from materializing in the first place and learn from the benefit and experience of others rather than just yourself. And that's really the kind of thing I'd really like to hit home is that you don't need to go on this journey alone. People are at various different stages of the journey, and it is extremely inefficient if you're just working in a silo and not looking to get the benefit of the experience of others who are going through something similar.
Totally agreed. If we could go to the next slide, I just want to make one quick point here before we wrap up. This is what we saw in terms of an AI confidence comparison. I thought this was particularly significant. There are plenty of insights to draw from this, but folks who are engaged and really trying to do something with generative AI have had some of that introductory training in a legal specific context. Almost 0%, or actually literally 0% of the Sense Collective members reported the feeling, I think we had quotes around it of, I really need help, don't know what's going on here. And that's to be expected, but I think it illustrates a point that whether it's through this initiatives like the Sense Collective or other forms of training or other, departmental, focus on use cases or applied innovation sprints that you're doing internally, that bottom level of competency of people saying, the kind of early adopters saying, I'm starting to have an epiphany here. I'm starting to have positive experiences, whether it's through personal context, like Kelly suggested, or actually applying it to their work. I think that is the critical piece at the bottom to make the upstream effects start to materialize, where you have I can get by, I'm very confident, and you develop more evangelists and more champions. I had a question for Kelly, but actually she already answered it in terms of how you bring some of those skeptical or hesitant team members it kind of across that baseline of competency and confidence. So I think that what I want to emphasize as a key insight from our research is that this isn't fundamentally about tools. It's about lasting capabilities. This goes back to the kind of upskilling training or reskilling debate of terminology that Kelly referenced, which is that people need to kind of get on board with this new way of working, and it should be have very, very positive effects. It doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be about cost cutting. And like Peter said, that messaging is really important. Of course, you should be honest and forthright. In some cases, maybe it is about that. But what I anticipate is that there will be a force multiplier effect on the amount of legal work that legal is being asked to do as a result of generative AI. And so I think that the unlocking of work isn't only about efficiency, it's about productivity and how you grow into those capabilities. But we at Factor, in the Sense Collective, and more broadly, just as a market participant in this conversation, we believe that you should create the conditions where your team can learn, can experiment, and can scale confidently. We want to bridge that critical gap between access and impact, because having access to the tools is just the beginning. Creating value from them requires the right mix of knowledge, of skills, and collaborative structures. And like I said earlier, I think the most important thing is to take some action. And committing to incorporating AI into your daily activities, I think you'll really begin to find a path forward. And we really look forward to continuing this conversation with many of you, and to working together in this journey of how the way we work is changing for everyone. All right. I think that's it. Thank you again to Peter and Kelly for sharing their thoughts and joining this panel. We will follow up with some highlights from the webinar and recording, as well as a copy of the benchmark report.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.